Hamas published a hostage video on March 24th, showing 2 live Israeli hostages in captivity. Meanwhile, the IDF continues to expand its operations in the northern and southern parts of the Gaza Strip, while rockets are fired from Gaza towards southern Israel. Rockets and missiles fired from Lebanon and Yemen targeting Israel as well, and the Fatah group has called upon Hamas to relinquish its control of the Gaza Strip amidst protests that are emerging of Palestinians in Gaza against both Israel and Hamas. I'm Alon Burstein. Let's dive deep into the latest developments in the Israel-Hamas War. On Monday, March 24th, the El Qassam Brigades published a 3-minute video showing 2 live Israeli hostages. The 2, Yosef Chaim Ochana and Elkanah Buchbut, refer to themselves in the video as prisoner number 21 and number 22, and say that they begged Hamas to allow them to speak in this video and that this was not forced upon them. The 2 state that their situation was incredibly harsh prior to the previous ceasefire that began in January of this year, and only when humanitarian aid began to enter into the Gaza Strip they were able to eat better, and that their captors provided for them. The 2 also chastised the Israeli government for its returning to fighting in the recent weeks, stating that the airstrikes that happened in the last several days before the video was recorded is the closest that they have come to death thus far, and that their most scariest moments have been the IDF airstrikes throughout the Gaza Strip. The 2 then appeal to the hostages that have been released in the most recent round of the hostage deal, asking them to scream out in their names and to force the Israeli government to return to a truce and to a hostage deal that will make them come home. The video ends with them appealing specifically to Ohad Ben Ami, who is a hostage that was released as part of the previous hostage deal on February 7th, stating that he has returned to his wife and daughters and has left them behind, asking them to speak for them, and specifically saying, "While you have returned to your wife and daughters, I have been left behind. I miss my son and I miss my wife." The video then ends with Hamas's customary fade-out, stating that the hostages will not come home unless this is within the framework of a hostage deal, and then an hourglass is shown, stating that the time is running out for the hostages. As a reminder, there are 59 Israeli hostages remaining in the Gaza Strip. Of them, the IDF has confirmed that 35 are dead, and it is estimated that 24 of them are still alive. With regards to where things stand in the hostage negotiations right now, the most significant advances over the last several days have been a new proposal that was put forth by Egypt, reportedly focusing on the release of 5 live hostages that includes the U.S. citizen Idan Alexander, in exchange for the release of hundreds of Palestinian prisoners, a 7-week truce, and the reopening of the crossings to allow the entrance of humanitarian aid based on the framework of the original deal. Egypt reportedly applied monumental pressure on Hamas to accept this deal, including issuing threats to Hamas that Egypt might expel the Hamas leaders that at various different times reside within Egypt if the deal is not accepted. On March 24th, it was reported that Hamas gave an overarching positive response to this potential deal, however that it was conditioning its approval on Israel beginning the implementation of Phase 2 of the original hostage deal within the first week of the truce. In Israel, in turn, it was reported that the country has not been submitted an official version of the Egyptian proposal, and that Israel is still adhering to the Witkoff proposal that includes the next phase of the hostage deal. The Witkoff proposal includes a limited release of hostages between 10 and 11 live hostages in exchange for a limited time ceasefire and the release of Palestinian prisoners. By March 26, Al Arabi al-Jadid quoted Egyptian sources, stating that the negotiations have broken down and have gotten nowhere. Later in the day, Hamas put out a statement stating that negotiations are continuously ongoing, but added that the movement will not accept any agreement that is only a temporary truce, that will only then, according to the movement, lead to a return to fighting and, quote, implementing the expulsion plan, end quote, referring to the Trump and Israeli plans for the either willful or forceful immigration of Palestinians from the Gaza Strip. In a moment of analysis, I'm going to say that at this point it appears that each side is seemingly waiting for the other one to crack first and become more flexible. Israel is demanding that Hamas accept a more limited ceasefire that does not include a complete end to the war. Israel reportedly is willing to release hundreds of Palestinian prisoners allow the re-entrance of humanitarian aid, but does not want a complete end to the war and an IDF withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. In turn, Hamas is demanding that Israel adhere to the originally signed deal between the sides and progress towards Phase 2, i.e. that Israel accept a complete end to the war and an IDF withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. I will say it is very likely that in the coming days Qatar will become probably more relevant in the negotiations, especially after the Egyptian option has seemingly failed. Qatar will likely want to be the one that puts forth a deal that now maybe is advanced by both sides. Obviously we'll learn more about this in the coming days. Turning to the ongoing situation in the Gaza Strip, the IDF has continued to expand its operation both in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip as well as in the southern parts. In the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, on March 23rd, IDF ground forces reportedly expanded their operation from the Beit Lahia region and moved towards the Beit Hanun area of Gaza City. That means expanding from this area and moving more eastward towards this area of Beit Hanun. This was reportedly accompanied by substantial airstrikes targeting Hamas infrastructure and operatives. Substantial artillery fire was also reported in the Tufts region of Gaza City on March 22nd, and on March 26th, additional evacuation orders were issued to the regions in the southern parts of Gaza City. Palestinians in the regions of Zaytun, Tel el-Halwa, the Old City, Sheikh Hajalin, as well as the southern areas of the Rimal neighborhood, so that is all this area of Gaza City, were all ordered to evacuate to the southern parts, more towards the Deir al-Balah region in the central parts of the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip, the IDF has continued to expand its operation in the Rafah region as well. It has recently issued evacuation orders to Palestinians in the Tel Sultan region, that is this region over here, where the IDF had some of its most harshest fighting in the war thus far. Major airstrikes were reported in the area in the last several days, which typically indicates that the IDF is, quote-unquote, preparing the region for an upcoming ground invasion. That is typically how things have progressed in the war. We have seen the IDF issuing evacuation orders, then we've seen major airstrikes to clear the area of possible Hamas lookout posts or areas that they have set up guard towers, and then we see the IDF invasion. Possibly we'll see that in the coming days. In addition to this, another significant operation in the past several days has been a major series of airstrikes that were carried out by the IDF on March 24th, simultaneously targeting over 100 vehicles and pickup trucks throughout the Gaza Strip that were used by Hamas throughout the war, as well as in the October 7th attack. All told, the IDF has reported that since the return to fighting, the military has targeted over 430 targets in the Gaza Strip that belong to Hamas and different Palestinian militant infrastructure. I will say that it is impossible to know when the IDF says that it targeted 430 targets if it is referring to airstrikes specifically or also to ground bombardments. Seemingly from that amount it is referring specifically to airstrikes. With regards to casualties on the ground, the Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip has reported that 830 Palestinians have been killed in the Gaza Strip since the ceasefire broke down. I remind everyone that with that, the Palestinian Health Ministry does not distinguish between militants and civilians. It simply reports the amount of people that have been killed in the Gaza Strip, that their bodies have been brought through the hospitals within the Gaza Strip. At this point, it is reporting 830 of those have been killed. The IDF in turn has reported that several dozen, if not hundreds, of Hamas operatives and militants have been killed, but the IDF has not given a specific number. Two more things I'm going to report with regards to the fighting in the Gaza Strip. First, amidst those that were killed, the IDF has carried out several prominent assassinations in the Gaza Strip in the last several days. These have included some key figures in Hamas's political and military wings. Among them, there has been Salah Bardawil. He is a prominent member of Hamas's political bureau and one of the more historic figures within the movement, and I will also add, he is one of the articulators of the movement's overall strategy. He was reportedly killed in the Muasi region of Han Yunis. I only mention that because the Muasi region up until now has been the humanitarian zone in the Gaza Strip. Possibly it will be defined again as a humanitarian zone as the IDF moves forward. Remains to be seen. A second prominent assassination was Ismail Barhoum. He is the person who was the de facto Hamas prime minister. He replaced Issam Da'alis, who was Hamas's prime minister, who was assassinated 5 days before that. He was then assassinated himself. Barhoum's assassination, I will say, was carried out with an airstrike that took place in the Al-Aqsa hospital in Han Yunis. This was heavily condemned internationally as the airstrike took place in a hospital. Israel in turn stated that Hamas is hiding its prominent figures in hospitals, and that's why it carried out a very targeted assassination in that hospital. Additional assassinations, this time of the military wing, was that of Jamil Ataradia. He was the Al-Qassam Sajaiya division commander in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, as well as Suleiman Shamali. He was a deputy leader of the Al-Qassam Gaza Brigade. Both of them were assassinated in the last several days. A second noteworthy facet about the ongoing fighting in the Gaza Strip is, as I've stated in the last several days, Hamas has yet to engage any of the IDF forces on the ground. Despite the IDF continuing its expansion into different regions of the Gaza Strip, there has yet to be a single shot fired from the Al-Qassam brigades or the Palestinian Islamic Jihad against any of the IDF units. This is very different than the way the war has been run until now. There has yet to even be an explosive device detonated or any booby traps that were activated against the IDF forces. I will say this is unprecedented not only in the war in the history of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but also internationally. This is relatively unprecedented that a territory is held by a terror group, then there is an invading army, yet the terror group does not engage that army on the ground. At this point, it appears to be a tactical decision that was taken by Hamas in order to maybe not give Israel justification in continuing its invasion internally, as well as Hamas trying to ask the negotiating countries in order to apply pressure on Israel. Either way, at this point, there has yet to be any active fighting that was reported on the ground. At the same time, it is important to note that both Hamas and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad have engaged in rocket fire towards Israel since the return to fighting in the Gaza Strip. Both groups have launched rockets towards different areas surrounding the Gaza Strip, and several days ago, Hamas also launched rockets towards Tel Aviv. In addition, there was also reported rocket fire towards Ashkelon and the areas of Beersheba. Turning to some of the regional developments with regards to the war, over the past several days there's been continuous missiles that were fired from Yemen towards Israel. The Houthis have been targeting both the central parts of the country in Tel Aviv and Gush Dan, as well as Jerusalem and the Netbag airport. On March 24th, the Houthi spokesperson Yahya Saria stated that one of the missiles that were launched on that day were the Palestine 2 hypersonic missile, that is specifically an escalation in the type of weaponry that the Houthis are firing towards Israel. I will say, however, that that missile, as well as others, were all intercepted outside of Israeli airspace. In addition to this, on March 22nd, 6 rockets were fired from Lebanon, targeting the northern Israeli city of Metula. The rockets that penetrated Israeli airspace were intercepted. I'll say that 3 of those rockets landed in Lebanon, and 3 did manage to penetrate Israeli airspace, and they were intercepted. In retaliation, the IDF carried out a series of over 50 airstrikes within Lebanon, targeting Hezbollah operatives and infrastructure throughout southern Lebanon, as well as in the areas of Tzor and the Bekaa Valley. With regards to what this means to the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon, Hezbollah very publicly put out a message an hour after those rockets were launched, denying responsibility for those rockets and pinning it on other groups, possibly Hamas in Lebanon, or possibly Palestinian Islamic Jihad, or even the Amal movement. Importantly also, the Lebanese military also put out immediate messages saying that it is going to hunt down those that are responsible and not allow a return to fighting between Lebanon and Israel. Hours later, the Lebanese military also stated that it located the launchers that were used in the firing of those rockets north of the Litani River, specifically between the areas of Tavnit and the Arnon villages. This is important because the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon relates primarily to the regions south of the Litani River, i.e., what Lebanon is trying to say is those rockets were fired from north of the Litani River, the military has hunted them down, but this unto itself is not a violation of the deal with regards to the Lebanese military taking charge of the region south of the Litani River. In a moment of analysis, I'll say that the takeaway from this is that the Lebanese government is likely very fearful of being seen as not honoring its part of the deal, leading to a possible return of fighting and a greater IDF invasion deeper into Lebanon. And thus, it is going well out of its way to try to show that it is dealing with this threat, and in addition to that, the threat was outside of the zone that was negotiated in the ceasefire between the sides, that this is seemingly a different problem, and also that the military is trying to deal with it. Before I conclude, there's one more report that I'm going to give with regards to some interesting developments politically in the Gaza Strip. Over the past several days, there have reportedly been spontaneous protests that have erupted within the Gaza Strip, with local Palestinians taking to the streets and protesting the continuation of the war and their endangered conditions. Importantly, these protests, which have included both children and grown-ups, chastised both Israel and Hamas, with chants and signs that all stated, "Stop the killing," "Our children want to live," as well as stating, "Hamas out, stop the war." The protests began in Beit Lahia in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, but have since spread also to Jabalia refugee camp, Sajaiya, as well as Deir al-Balah in the central parts of the Gaza Strip. And I'll also say that an important indication for the fact that Hamas is very concerned about these protests is that the movement bothered to put out a specific message stating that the protests are only serving Israel and that Israel wants to sow divisions between the Palestinians, that anyone who's going out to protest is in fact serving the Israeli Minister of Defense, Israel Katz. It's also important to say that the Palestinian Fatah movement in the West Bank, that is the movement of the Palestinian Authority Chairman Mahmoud Abbas, which is the chief rival of Hamas within the Palestinian population, also capitalized on these protests in Gaza, calling upon Hamas to, quote, "listen to the will of the people and relinquish its control of the Gaza Strip," end quote. Over the past days, Hamas has stated again that it is willing to give up its governmental control in the Gaza Strip. However, it has said that it will only do so as part of an internal consensus within the Palestinian movement. It is not going to do that in response to an Israeli demand or a United States demand, but only as part of an agreement within the Palestinians. And the movement has also repeatedly stated that it is not going to disarm and surrender its weapons. According to the movement, as long as the Israeli occupation exists, it will not surrender its weapons that are necessary to defend the Palestinian people, end quote. That is my highlight on the latest developments on the Israel-Hamas war in the last several days. If you find these reports informative, please do remember to hit that like button, subscribe, send them on to anyone who you think might be interested in updates on the war. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comment section below. I'm Alon Burstein. I'm a visiting assistant professor and Israel Institute fellow in the Department of Political Science at Tufts University. Thanks for watching.